I need you to believe me when I say that what happened in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina in the summer of 2012 has never left me, not for a single day. Even now, more than a decade later, when I close my eyes at night, I can still hear the low hum in the trees and see the strange movement of shadows that made me question everything I thought I knew about nature and about myself. People assume the mountains are peaceful, a refuge from the chaos of the modern world. But anyone who has spent real time in them will tell you that the woods hold secrets, and sometimes they choose to reveal them when you least expect it. I thought I was going on a simple hiking trip, but what I found out there tied me to a story older than my own family line and left me with a memory I will never escape. The Blue Ridge Range has always carried its own legends. Local residents, especially in the small towns like Blowing Rock and Boone, often speak of ghostly lights that appear on ridges at night, or of the singing winds that seem to carry voices if you're quiet enough to listen. Old records even show settlers in the 1800s writing about unexplainable sounds, hollow knocking deep in the valleys, echoing footsteps that followed travelers at night even when no one was there. One of the most famous stories is that of Brown Mountain, where lights have been documented for centuries, flickering orbs that move across the sky and along the slopes without explanation. Scientists have offered theories: swamp gas, headlights reflecting, electrical discharges. But those who've lived here longest just shake their heads and say the mountains keep their own truths. I had heard all of this growing up, of course. My grandfather, James Whitaker, used to tell me about camping trips he took in the 1960s when he and his brother saw the lights dancing over Brown Mountain and swore they heard a woman singing in the dark. He'd say, "The mountains don't forget, and if you walk far enough into them, they remember you too." At the time, I thought it was just a poetic way of making a kid's bedtime stories more exciting. But those words would return to me years later in a way I couldn't have imagined. In late July of 2012, I was 24 years old and working a job in Charlotte that left me drained and restless. I needed an escape, and when my old college friend Daniel Price suggested a hiking trip into the Blue Ridge, I said yes immediately. Daniel had grown up in Boone and knew the trails better than anyone I trusted. We planned for a 3-day trek, starting from the Wilson Creek area and making our way into some of the more isolated backcountry. Daniel promised me that we'd see parts of the forest few outsiders ever got to, places without cell reception, where the night sky was so dark you could see the Milky Way stretching across the heavens like a river of fire. I didn't know it then, but that same darkness would soon terrify me. The first day of the hike felt ordinary enough. The trailhead was alive with the buzzing of cicadas, the sticky July heat clinging to our clothes as we moved steadily upward. We carried packs heavy with supplies, enough food, tents, and gear to last comfortably. Daniel was in high spirits, telling me stories about local legends as we walked. He spoke of the Cherokee, who once believed that certain hollows in these mountains were gateways between the living and the dead, and that sometimes the cries of lost hunters could be heard drifting through the trees. He told me of a hiker who had vanished in 1997 not far from where we were walking. His body never recovered, though search teams combed the slopes for weeks. People said the mountains swallowed him. Daniel said with a grin that seemed a little too forced. And sometimes, at night, hikers still hear him calling for help. I laughed it off, but a strange unease crept into me as we continued deeper. By late afternoon, clouds rolled in, covering the peaks in mist. The forest grew quiet in a way that felt unnatural, the usual chatter of birds replaced by an eerie stillness. We set up camp near a creek, the sound of water trickling over stones offering some comfort. As night fell, I found myself lying awake in my tent, listening to the forest. At first, it was ordinary, the rustle of leaves, the occasional splash of a fish in the creek. But around midnight, I heard something else, a low humming sound, steady and almost mechanical, though softer, like the vibration of a cello string drawn out forever. I thought it was my imagination, maybe even the blood rushing in my ears, but when I glanced over, I saw Daniel sitting upright in his tent, his silhouette rigid. He heard it too. "It happens sometimes out here," he whispered when I asked. "Don't worry about it. just the wind through the ridges. His explanation was quick, practiced, and not entirely convincing. The sound continued for what felt like hours, fading only as the first light of dawn began to touch the treetops. That morning, Daniel avoided the subject altogether, moving quickly to pack up camp. We pressed further into the backcountry, but something had shifted in me. The forest no longer felt like a neutral space. It felt watchful, as though it had taken notice of us the night before and was now waiting for something. I didn't yet know what, but I could feel the weight of my grandfather's words echoing in my head. The mountains remember you too. The second day in the mountains carried a different weight, as if the forest itself had shifted during the night and was now quietly testing us. We woke to a heavy fog clinging to the trees, the kind that makes every branch seem closer than it really is, as though the forest were folding in on itself. Daniel was unusually quiet, his usual chatter about the trails replaced with a sharp focus on the map, as if he were pushing us forward with some urgency. I didn't question him then, but I could feel that the hum we had heard in the night still lingered in his mind just as it did in mine. By mid-morning, we had reached an area where the trail seemed to vanish into a tangled mass of rhododendron, and Daniel told me we'd need to bushwhack a little to get to a ridge he wanted me to see. He promised the view was worth it, though I noticed he never said he had been there before. The air grew cooler as we climbed, the fog thinning but never leaving entirely. Every now and then, I thought I heard footsteps behind us, faint and deliberate, matching our own pace. Each time I stopped, the sound ceased instantly, leaving only the hollow stillness of the woods. Daniel noticed me glancing back and said nothing, but the way his jaw tightened told me he heard it too. By the time we reached the ridge, the sky had cleared enough to reveal a sweeping view of rolling mountains stretching into the horizon, layers upon layers fading into blue. It should have been beautiful, but the silence was overwhelming. Not a bird, not an insect, not even the rustle of leaves, just a stillness that pressed against my ears until I almost wished for the hum again. We set up a small camp there, though the sun was still high. Daniel said it was better to stop early, to let the forest settle around us. His words didn't make sense to me, but I didn't argue. As the afternoon waned, I noticed carvings on a cluster of rocks near the ridge's edge. They weren't initials or simple marks. They were old, weathered symbols that looked like spirals and intersecting lines. I traced one with my finger, feeling the grooves cut deep into the stone. Cherokee, Daniel said softly, standing behind me. Or maybe even older. Some say the markings are guides, meant to show safe passage through the mountains. Others say they're warnings. He didn't elaborate, and I didn't press him, but a cold unease settled into me. That night the hum returned, but it was different. It pulsed in irregular waves, rising and falling, almost like a breath. I lay awake staring at the fabric of my tent, my heart pounding, while Daniel shifted restlessly in his own. Around 2 in the morning, I heard something else, faint singing, high and thin, drifting through the trees. It wasn't words I could understand, more like a melody carried on the wind, but it was undeniably human. I sat up, listening, and Daniel hissed from his tent, "Don't answer it." His voice was sharp, urgent, unlike anything I'd heard from him before. I wanted to ask him what he meant, but the singing grew louder for a moment, then faded away, leaving only the pulse of the hum. Sleep never came. When morning broke, Daniel was already packed and waiting, his eyes red from exhaustion. He told me we needed to head deeper, toward an old fire road that hadn't been used in decades. "There's something I need to show you," he said, and though I pressed him for answers, he only shook his head. We hiked for hours, the forest growing darker and denser as we descended into a hollow that seemed to swallow the sunlight. The air grew damp and heavy, carrying the smell of moss and wet stone. I felt as though we were walking into the belly of the mountain itself. Around noon, we stumbled upon the remains of an old cabin, its roof collapsed, its timbers blackened with age. The doorframe still stood, crooked but intact, and inside I could see the remnants of a stone hearth. Daniel didn't step inside. Instead, he stood at the threshold, staring at the ground. When I asked him what he was looking for, he finally told me a story. In 1938, he said, A family had lived in that cabin. A man named William Turner, his wife Clara, and their 2 children. One winter they vanished without explanation. Neighbors found the cabin empty, food still on the table, firewood stacked by the hearth. No signs of struggle, no footprints in the snow. Just gone. Over the years, hikers claimed to hear voices near the site, especially children's laughter, though no one ever found evidence of the family again. The official record labeled them missing, presumed dead, but locals whispered that the mountain had taken them. I shivered, looking at the ruins, and I couldn't shake the thought that the singing I'd heard the night before might have been tied to them. Daniel didn't linger. He led us further into the hollow, past the cabin, and along a faint path that seemed more like an animal trail than anything made for people. The deeper we went, the stronger the hum became, vibrating through the soles of my boots, until it felt as if the ground itself was alive. By dusk, we reached a clearing unlike anything I had ever seen. The trees here grew in a perfect circle, their trunks evenly spaced, their branches forming an almost cathedral-like canopy overhead. In the center of the clearing stood a stone, taller than a man, covered in the same spiral carvings I had seen on the ridge. The air buzzed with energy, a faint glow clinging to the edges of the stone as if it held light within it. My breath caught in my throat. Daniel's face was pale, his voice low when he finally spoke. "This is what I needed to show you," he said. "This is where the mountain remembers." I stood frozen in that clearing, staring at the stone as though it might suddenly move. The hum that had haunted us since the first night now radiated directly from it, deep and steady, vibrating in my chest like a second heartbeat. The spirals etched into the surface seemed to shimmer faintly in the dimming light, as if responding to our presence. I whispered to Daniel, asking him how he had known about this place, but he didn't answer right away. He circled the stone slowly, his hand brushing along the grooves, and then he finally said, "My grandfather brought me here once when I was a kid. He said our family had a connection to it, that some people are called to see it and others aren't. I never came back until now." His words unsettled me, not because of what he said, but because of the way he said them, like he had been waiting for this moment, like he knew I would be part of it too. The air grew colder as night fell, the temperature dropping sharply despite the summer season. I pulled my jacket tighter, but the chill seemed to come from the ground itself, seeping upward through the soil. That's when I noticed it. The forest around the clearing was utterly still, not even a leaf moved. The silence was so complete that the only sound was the steady hum, and then, layered faintly beneath it, came the singing again. This time it was clearer, closer, and unmistakably the voice of a woman. The melody wove through the trees, both beautiful and terrifying, pulling at me in a way I can't fully explain. Daniel grabbed my arm. His grip strong, his eyes locked on mine. "Don't follow it," he said sharply, his voice hoarse. But the moment he released me, I found my feet carrying me toward the edge of the circle, toward the sound. It wasn't that I wanted to disobey him. It was that my body no longer felt entirely under my control. The singing threaded through my veins like a current, urging me forward. I stepped past the tree line and immediately felt the weight of the forest close around me. The glow of the stone dimmed behind me, swallowed by the shadows. For a moment, I was alone in the dark, but then I saw her. At first, I thought she was just a figure made of mist, pale and translucent, drifting between the trees. But as I drew nearer, I could make out her face, delicate and sorrowful, her eyes reflecting a pain so profound it nearly dropped me to my knees. She raised her hand as though beckoning, and her lips moved in time with the song that filled the air. "Clara," I whispered before I realized what name had left my mouth. The woman vanished instantly, dissolving into the mist as though she had never been there. My breath caught, and I spun back toward the clearing, only to find Daniel standing at the edge, his face pale. "You saw her, didn't you?" he said, not as a question, but as a statement he already knew the answer to. I stumbled back into the clearing, shaken, my pulse racing. Daniel sat me down near the stone and told me the truth as he understood it. His grandfather, like mine, had spoken of the mountains remembering. According to him, there were places, thin places, he called them, where the boundary between the past and the present weakened, where echoes of what once happened bled through into the living world. The stone was one of those places, maybe the strongest of all, and those who came too close to it risked being drawn into what it remembered. That's why the Turners vanished, Daniel said quietly. They didn't just disappear. The mountain kept them. His words should have sounded insane, but after what I had just seen, I couldn't dismiss them. The air grew colder still, and the glow of the stone pulsed brighter, as though responding to the darkness around us. Then, without warning, the singing erupted again, louder this time, filling the clearing until the air itself seemed to vibrate with sound. My vision blurred, and suddenly I wasn't in the clearing anymore. I was standing inside the cabin we had seen earlier, only it wasn't in ruins. It was whole, fire burning in the hearth, the smell of stew filling the air. A man sat at the table, his head bowed, while a woman hummed softly as she stirred the pot. Two children laughed in the corner, playing with carved wooden figures. The scene was so vivid I could feel the warmth of the fire, hear the crackle of wood, smell the herbs in the stew. But then, in an instant, the warmth turned to ice. The fire went out, the laughter died, and the woman turned toward me. It was Clara. Her eyes locked onto mine, and she reached out a trembling hand. "Help us," she whispered, and the sound shattered the vision. I was back in the clearing, gasping, my knees in the dirt. Daniel knelt beside me, shaking my shoulders, his face wild with fear. "You saw them," he said. "You saw what they left behind." I nodded, unable to speak, my throat tight with terror and sorrow. The stone's glow blazed brighter now, the hum reaching a pitch that felt unbearable, and the trees around us began to creak and groan as though bending under an unseen weight. Daniel pulled me back, shouting over the sound. "We shouldn't have come here. The mountain doesn't want us here." His words rang true, but I also knew something else. The mountain hadn't just shown me its memory by accident. It had chosen me, pulled me into its story, and now it wasn't going to let me leave unchanged. The hum became a roar, the stone pulsed like a heartbeat, and in that moment, as the forest trembled around us, I realized the legend wasn't just a story. It was alive, and we had stepped directly into its grasp. When I think back to that final night in the mountains, it doesn't feel like a memory in the ordinary sense. It feels more like something etched into me, as if the hum of that stone still lives in my bones. After the roar faded and the clearing fell back into silence, Daniel and I sat in the dirt, too shaken to move, the glow from the stone casting long shadows across our faces. Neither of us spoke for a long time, afraid that if we did, the silence would shatter and bring the voices back. Finally, Daniel said we had to leave, that staying another night would be a mistake we couldn't take back. I agreed, though my body felt heavy, as if the mountain itself resisted my decision. We packed in silence and started down a faint trail under the cover of moonlight. Every step felt uncertain, the forest twisting and shifting as though it resented our departure. More than once, I thought I saw figures moving just beyond the trees, glimpses of faces in the fog, but when I turned to look directly, nothing was there. At one point, I heard a child's laughter echo through the hollow, so faint it could have been my imagination, but it froze me in place all the same. Daniel tugged me forward, whispering that we couldn't stop. We hiked for hours through the darkness, our headlamps casting narrow beams that seemed swallowed instantly by the woods. Around 3 in the morning, exhaustion overtook me and I stumbled against a fallen log. That's when I saw it again. Not the stone, but the vision of the cabin, flickering like a lantern in the distance. The warm glow of firelight seeped through its windows, impossible and real all at once. Clara's voice carried on the air, faint but pleading. My chest ached with the pull to walk toward it, to step inside and let the mountain take me the way it had taken them. For a moment I almost did. But then Daniel's hand gripped mine, hard enough to hurt, his voice breaking through the haze. "Don't you dare," he growled, his eyes fierce with desperation. "That's not for us." His grip was the only thing that pulled me back, the vision dissolving into the dark. We stumbled onward until the first light of dawn bled into the sky. The forest seemed to ease with the sunrise, the oppressive weight lifting, though the hum never left entirely. By mid-morning, we reached the old fire road Daniel had mentioned, and from there, civilization felt closer. The silence gave way to birdsong again, the forest returning to something almost normal. When we finally emerged near the trailhead 2 days earlier than planned, I felt as if we had crossed back from one world into another. We didn't speak on the drive back to Boone. Daniel dropped me off at a small diner, promising we would talk later, but later never came. He left town that week, moved west, and I haven't seen him since. I tried to bury the memory, to rationalize it as exhaustion, as tricks of the mind, but the evidence kept surfacing in ways I couldn't ignore. That fall, I returned to visit my grandfather in Asheville. Over coffee, I told him a softened version of what I had experienced, careful not to reveal everything. When I mentioned the stone and the singing, he went pale, his hands trembling against his mug. He said only one thing: "You shouldn't have answered the mountain." He refused to elaborate, but in the weeks that followed, I noticed the way he would glance at me when he thought I wasn't looking, as if measuring whether I had brought something back with me. A year later, he passed away, and among his belongings I found a worn leather journal. Inside were notes dating back decades, entries about thin places in the Blue Ridge, sketches of spiral carvings, even a rough map that marked the exact clearing where Daniel had led me. In one entry from 1974, he wrote, "The stone remembers. It shows you what it keeps. But the price of seeing is that it never forgets you either." Those words chilled me more than anything I had witnessed. I realized then that my grandfather had stood in that same clearing, just as I had, and that whatever he carried from it had followed him all his life. And now it follows me. It has been years since that hike, and though I have never returned to that hollow, the mountain has a way of reminding me. Sometimes at night, when the world is quiet, I hear the faint hum again, low and steady, as if the earth itself were breathing beneath my floorboards. Sometimes, if I close my eyes, I see Clara's face, her hand reaching out, her lips moving in silence. I never hear her words anymore, but I know what she would say: "Help us." I don't know if the mountain trapped them, or if they became part of something older and stranger than I can understand. What I do know is that the boundary between past and present, between the living and the remembered, is thinner than we want to believe. My grandfather was right. The mountains don't forget. They keep their stories alive, and once you've heard them, you belong to them, whether you want to or not. And so I live my life with that truth pressing against me, carrying a secret I can't explain to anyone who hasn't felt it for themselves. If you ever find yourself wandering deep in the Blue Ridge and you hear the hum beneath the silence, I beg you, don't follow it. Don't listen for the singing, because if you do, the mountain will remember you too.